Okay, so I've talked to you about why systematic lit reviews are good, or we think they are, systematic quantitative ones, the ones we use. What I want to do now, as you can see from the slide, is talk to you about being systematic. Now this is important for whatever type of literature review method that you want to do. This is about how to go about making sure that you can, with a reasonable amount and possibly even a lot of certainty, say, I have read all the relevant literature, and when I make my statements, I can make them with the authority that I'm recording what's out there at the time on this discipline area. So as you can see, it's defining the topic, always critically important, working out your research questions, working out from those research questions what keywords you're going to use to search for the actual literature, then what database searches you do and how you go about doing that, and then what are the criteria you're going to use to include papers into the literature review, particularly if you're using a meta-analysis or one of the quantitative lit review method that we're talking about. So with this, we want to make sure you make these judgments right, because if you get this right from the beginning, well, and you never do quite get it from the beginning, but you get it right early in the process, it saves so much time later on. So that's why we're going to go through it in a little bit of detail with some of the catches, pointing out some of the limitations and how to make it work really well. So as you can see, what we're going to go through is those first sets of steps in the 15-step process. This is the first group of them, the being systematic. The very first thing you need to do is define your topic. Now, this is really important for your whole thesis, for the whole of what you're going to be talking about. It might be very broad, but the systematic quantitative lit review is going to be focusing on one particular part of that. So you need to define exactly what it is you're going to look at. Now, for some projects, there are beautifully some key words that capture most of what you're going to be doing. So luckily, for example, one of the students did one on community gardens, and nearly every paper on community gardens has the word community garden in the title, so she had it really easily defined. Another student was looking at the impacts of non-motorised nature-based tourism activities on birds. Now, birds was easy, but that was a little bit more complicated. So first of all, you want to work out exactly what you're going to be doing as this core part of your review. So defining the topic. Next thing is working out your research questions. So with this, what you need to do is work out, okay, so I've got this topic, community gardens. What do I want to find out about it? I've got this topic, finding out about impacts of tourism on birds. I've got this topic, wanting to find out about shark tourism. How do I go, what are the questions that I'm looking for? And this helps shape where you're going to go through with that material. And forming your research questions is an iterative process. You have something in mind to begin with, you work through the process and you keep revising them as you go, because sometimes you find out something really different at the end. Best thing to do then is revise your research questions to match the fabulous results you've got. So having worked through that a bit, in discussion with your supervisor, in your head, reflecting on it a bit of cogitating, bit of going for a walk, having a beer, having a bath, reflective thinking, whatever works for you, you start working out keywords. Now, you need to identify the relevant literature, but not lots and lots of irrelevant literature. And this is part of the systematic that's challenging. You want to get everything that's relevant that you can, but you don't want to be spending the rest of your life looking through all the literature on a topic. So using clearly defined keywords helps with this. And it's a bit of a trial and error process. You may need to think about, are there synonyms? And that's a really particularly important thing. So sometimes the same thing is referred to by different words. For the review that was done on the impacts of nature-based tourism, people talk about hiking, they talk about trampling, they talk about walking, and in Australia we talk about bushwalking. So just to find out about that one activity, there had to be at least 4 words that you had to use there. So think about those in terms of how many synonyms. One of the things here that's really useful for using these types of searches and using keyword searches is that universities have university librarians who are there to help you. And it's really useful to go at this stage, if you haven't already, and go introduce yourself to the university librarians and book a session to find out about doing searches on scientific and other databases, academic databases, because they'll give you lots of tricks, lots of smart ways of doing things, so have a chat to them. Now, an example of the ones that we ended up using for this more diffuse topic, community gardens was easy, but for looking at the impacts of non-motorised nature-based activity on birds, was we had birds, that worked well, in combination with trail, track, walking, hiking, impact, disturbance, mountain biking, effect, dog walking, horse riding, ecotourism, tourism, and recreation. So what you'll find is you'll need to search multiple times through even one database using different combinations of these to make sure that you really are picking up all of the papers that you need. What databases to use? Well, again, talk to the university librarians. They're very good at this. The ones that we've used variously are Web of Science, Google Scholar, Science Direct, Scopus, ProQuest, Web of Knowledge, Sage, Biomed. The trick here is within your discipline there are often a set of common databases that are searched. But if you're using an interdisciplinary project, which can sometimes happen, you have to make sure you use a wide variety of databases so you really are going to pick up the full suite of topics. So for example, on the one on community gardens, we found that from law journals through to social science journals, natural history journals, crime reduction journals. So we had to make sure that we were searching very broadly in a wide range of databases. So those are most probably the critical things in terms of doing that. But then there comes to be this issue about what do you actually include? What papers, the selection criteria. So you started to find the papers, you started to find where they are. But what you end up finding out is this paper relevant or not? And at this point, you're going to have to develop some sort of criteria for inclusion. We did one which was that it had to be a published research paper. It couldn't be a review. It couldn't be in the grey literature. It had to be published in an academic journal. But you might want to think about that sort of a criteria where you want to make that line in terms of the authority of the data. But you also might want to also say, is it principally about this topic or is it not about, is it a bit far away? And with this, again, as we say, the challenge in the systematic is when do I stop? How far do I go? How many papers do I have to search? And with this, the difficulty is if you're doing a narrative review, you need to identify generally the most common papers, the key ones. If you're doing a systematic lit review, you actually have to be systematic. You want to be making sure you get nearly everything. So you need to make sure that you search for all the stuff that you need out there. And this is one of the most common questions for people, when's enough enough? Well, what we tend to find is when you're starting to keep coming across the same papers again and again, and you've spent quite a long time and you've come up with nothing new, you know that you're starting to, it's like fishing, you're starting to catch all the fish at that point. The other thing you need to think about is just being, one of the ways we found that was really important to back check or forward check is you can use the reference lists of the papers to go back in time, because of course earlier papers are often not in the electronic databases, and it's a great way of checking. If you go through the reference list and you hit reading the titles and you go, yep, got that one, got that one, got that one, got one, you know you're pretty clear. And the other way you can do, of course, is now you can go forward looking at who has cited that paper. So you can do that as a way of also double checking going forward. So it takes a while. It's not an easy, it's a structured way of doing it, which makes it easier, but it is a lot of work. And there are some places, keyword selection, database selection, and inclusion criteria, where you need to make judgments. And so you need to think about making those judgments really carefully.